Hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome back to Kenny's Cavern of Collectible Materials. It's been a while since I did a video actually, but I've been down with all sorts of winter maladies and I didn't want to come on here coughing and spluttering, but back to full fitness now, so here we go. Okay, today I'm going to talk to you about pulp magazines. More specifically Pulp Hero magazines, or Hero Pulps, as they were popularly known, and in particular this good looking chap here. Okay, now some of you might recognise him as the Shadow. You may recognise him from the average 1994 film starring Alec Baldwin. You might recognise him from the resurgence that he had in the Dynamite comics recently. You might even, older viewers might even remember him from the old DC revival back in the 80s, I think it was, or late 70s. But the Shadow was the most popular of the pulp heroes. Now, some of you might not know much about pulps, so hopefully this video will be as informative as it is entertaining, hopefully. Now, just a brief word, pulp magazines started, or probably way back in the late 1800s, came into sort of like general popularity around about 1910, I would think. Recognisable characters like Tarzan, Buck Rogers, they started life in the pulp magazines. And basically what pulps were, they got the name pulps because they were printed on very, very cheap paper. They were this size. That's I'm going to use, by the way, I'm going to use my collection of pulp reprints, facsimile editions to show you what exactly the Shadow pulps were. And they came into prominence round about, or major prominence with the pulp heroes round about the early 1930s, late 20s. So I'll take you back 90 years almost to 1929, 1930. A pulp magazine company called Street and Smith sponsored a radio show. Now you have to remember that back in 1930, America was in the middle of a depression brought about by the Wall Street financial crash, and this was all pre-television, pre-mass market paperbacks, pre-comics as we know them now, and basically the main forms of entertainment for the populace, most of who were pretty poor, was the radio and these pulp magazines, which were both affordable. The pulp magazines ran out at about 10 cents a copy, and radio, once you bought your radio, well, it was free apart from the electric you needed to run it. And back in 1930, a famous pulp publisher called Street and Smith, they sponsored a show on one of the radio stations. Basically, it was to publicise their own publication, which was Detective Stories Weekly, I think, if memory serves. And what would happen is they would adapt some of the stories from the magazine to the radio, and hoping that people would listen to them and then rush out and buy the next copy of the magazine when it hit the newsstands. Now, this is where things get a bit strange with this particular character, the Shadow, because he started life as a voice. I'll quickly explain. This radio show that Street and Smith sponsored had a commentator at the start, and it was just a voice called the Shadow. And people were intrigued by this, and soon this Shadow character was actually narrating the adaptations of the stories. And people became more and more intrigued with the character until it got to the point where they were going to the newsstand and actually asking for copies of the Shadow Pulp magazine. Now, Street and Smith obviously didn't want to miss a beat here, and they decided that they would hang on to the copyright of this character by producing a magazine. Now, they had no great expectations for this magazine because they didn't even bother to get a proper cover printed up. They just used a stock cover with a Chinese gentleman or an Oriental gentleman with his shadow in the background. They added the shadow, basically. So what they did was they had this bright idea of running a competition to try and flesh out this character. I'll just show you here the if I can find it, the ads that went out in the Pulp magazines. But basically they didn't have any idea who or what the Shadow should be, because he was just this voice on the radio. If I can find it, I will show it to you. Just bear with me for 1 second. That was the very first issue, as I mentioned earlier, of the Oriental gentleman with the shadow added in the background. But as I say, they had no idea at this point who or what the Shadow was. I really should have sorted this out before I started the talk. There he is. Right. Okay. Sorry about this. There we go. There's the ad that they put out. What the Shadow looks like. Blah blah. And to their surprise, the first issue. This. I mean, it was only intended to be one issue. This first issue sold out like that. And so they did the obvious thing and decided it would become a regular pulp magazine. It started out as a quarterly magazine, and then was popular enough to get transferred to monthly, and then actually became bi-weekly, twice monthly, where it stayed for most of its life. There were 325 issues of the magazine. It lasted until, I think, 1949. Of course, by then other forms of entertainment had come into being, and pulp magazines weren't as popular anymore. But it remains the longest run of a pulp hero in history. You had sort of Doc Savage and the Spider and G8 and his Battle Aces and people like this, and none of those were anywhere near as popular as the Shadow. Now I don't have any of the pulp magazines to show you. As I say, I'm going to show you my collection of reprints, which are facsimile editions of the old pulps. But this is what they looked like. You can see probably better this one. They were as I say, they were printed on this very, very cheap paper, and the covers were uncut, and they actually overlapped the Pulp magazine itself, which made them look very sort of like cheap and nasty, if you like. But they are very collectible these days. I mean, you've got to be hardcore to get into pulp collecting, because they really are pricey. I myself had a fairly large collection of shadow pulps at one time. They say they say you should never have any regrets in life. If I had one, it would be that I sold my shadow pulp collection. Now, I had just over 100 of these, of the 325, but they were in what I would say near mint condition. Now, this is very, very unusual for a pulp magazine that old. I bought a majority of them for £5 each, as I recall. I sold them for £8 each a few years later. And now that sort of condition of shadow pulp would probably cost you around about £250 each. So you can understand why I'm a bit sad that I don't have them anymore. But anyway, that's by the by. Right, I will. Now I've got a burgeoning collection of these. I've just got round to starting a serious collection of them. You know, I've had a few in the past, but just recently I've been lucky. Actually, I found a chap on the internet who was selling his collection, and I've picked them up very, very cheaply. Probably, I don't know, a lot of these I've picked up from him, and average, I would say, I mean, different prices on eBay, but an average maybe about £5 or £6 a copy. Now, to get these from America, you're looking at minimum 15 quid, because you've got the postage costs as well. The actual cover price is $14.95, which I don't know, relates to 12 quid. But actually finding them's not easy, because they started reprinting these in 2008, and I've been lucky enough to get the first 28, and then I've got most of the others up to about 40, issue number 43. And about 120 of these have been done, of which I have about 70. So, you know, I'm getting there. But that was the very, very first issue. Now, they didn't reprint these in any sort of order. You know, they didn't start with the first story and work through. They just picked random issues. And I mean, as lovely as they are, I mean, these are a reminder of the pulps I used to have. As lovely as they are, there is one thing that niggles me about them, and that is that each magazine, each reprint has two stories, but you only get one cover, because on the back they decided to go with the blurb, and resultantly you just get a small cover of the one that's on the front and the other story that's in there. I mean, I would have loved to have seen the front and the back cover, that to be the back cover, so you get both covers. Because, to be quite honest, these, I mean, I've been collecting stuff for a lot of years, and covers, you know, I love covers, comic covers, paperback covers. These are some of my favourite covers of all time, because I love the character so much. Anyway, that was the very first issue. Now, there are what I call classic shadow covers, and there are sort of more mundane ones where you only see the shadow's hand, or you see him in his shadow in silhouette on the cover somewhere. But apart from that first issue where they didn't bother printing up a proper cover, all of the other shadow pulps through to, I don't know, sometime in the 1940s, all actually had the shadow on the cover, whether it be, as I say, full feature or in silhouette, shadow-wise, or it's just his hand as that one is on the right there. He's there. He's somewhere. Sometimes he's hard to spot, but he is there. That is what I classify as one of the classic shadow covers. These were painted by an artist called George Rosen. At least the early ones were, and he's the definitive shadow artist as far as I'm concerned. Later, some were done by other artists. An artist called Graves Gladney did a few of the later ones, and a couple of other artists who I can't remember their names because the art's not very good, to be honest. But this is the guy, as far as I'm concerned. He is the shadow guy. So you've got. Fortunately, when they picked the front cover, they've normally picked a front cover from one of the pulps that was really nice, and then, I mean, this one's not so good. This is one of the 1940s covers when they got a bit surrealistic and not very nice. So you've got a lot of those. So at least the ones that are on the front are normally covers from the 30s. 30s basically had the early 30s that Rosen did up until, 1937 are all nice, and then Graves Gladney took over, and some of those are nice, but then after that, not so great. This is another one of the what I call the classic shadow covers, issue 3. Again, that's the other story that's in there. As I say, that I mentioned that some of the issues have got the shadow in silhouette there. That's one of those. I don't know why they did that. I would prefer to have seen all the what I call the classic covers. That's issue 4, and this is annoying, this one, because that's a classic cover. The shadow sort of in action. They're the ones that really stand out. But on the other side, the one that's not printed in full is one of my favourite covers. I love that one. If you could see that in full cover, you'd know what I mean. But it's there anyway, at least. And that's another. That's one of the real sort of like famous covers. That one. Weighing good against evil. And then we have somebody who purports to be the shadow but isn't, third shadow. And it's one of the nicer covers without the action, the cobra there. Another one of the classic action covers. These are all from the early mid 30s. Most of these George Rosen covers. The other side you've got one from around a similar period, but you've only got the shadow in silhouette there. There's one of the real classic covers. I mean, that is the shadow. He's in full shoot 'em up mode there, if you like, and he did shoot a lot of people, believe me. And another action cover. I had most of these, most of the 30s ones, which is another reason I'm really miffed that I got rid of them, but that one's a weirder one. It's more of a surrealistic cover, that one, with the shadow in silhouette there. Right, now we move on to, this is number 11. It's another one I used to have. It's not so great, that one. Right. There we go. That was one of the very last stories. I think it was the second from last story. George Rosen came back to do these covers. These were in the very late 1940s when the Shadow's popularity began to wane, and that's the other story that's in there. Yeah, Six Men of Evil. That's one of the 1940s covers that they got. The covers got really sort of iffy. You can see the shadow at the bottom there, but that's not my idea of a good shadow cover. Grove of Doom. That's another classic cover. The shadow trapped for a change. That's the other story in there. Now, this is probably the most famous of all the Shadow pulps. This is the origin story, if you like. But it's worth mentioning here that there is no definitive origin for the Shadow, because his true identity was never ever revealed in the pulp magazines. He had an alter ego of Lamont Cranston. He was a kind of a socialite man about town, and he used his alter ego to get information. And he had a lot of agents as well who got him information, who worked for him. But it was thought for a long time that his true identity was that of a chap called Kent Allard, who was an aviator, which would make sense because a lot of the Shadow's adventures, or not a lot, but a few of the Shadow's adventures take place outside of America, around the world, in Europe and places, Africa. But that was never ever proved to be his true identity, and it remains a mystery to this day. It's still talked about in Shadow fan circles, if you like. Another classic cover. This is one of my favourites. There again, another one I used to have. Sob. And there's one of the later 30s covers, which is not so great. Okay, there's another nice action cover there. And not so good. So as I say, at least I've put the good ones on the front cover, and the other ones are in smaller form. Golden Masks. Another one with the shadows. Shadow. And Girl in Peril. That used to be a big feature of some of the pulps. They used to have pulps called Spicy This and Spicy That, which were all sort of like semi-clothed females in danger, and that. I think that's a tribute to one of those, actually. It took me a while to spot, that's the late 1930s one. It took me a while to spot the shadow in there, but he's actually up here. You can just see if you look very closely, you can just see the edge of his hat. But it took me a while to spot that one. I'm thinking, maybe not all the covers had him on, but he is there. I can assure you, I can see the edge of his hat there. Right, there's another. The Shadow in Peril. It didn't happen very often. He was normally in control, but sometimes he got himself into a pickle. I remember I had this one, but the cover had been, some idiot had trimmed the cover, so there wasn't a proper. Didn't look proper, as I say. The covers were uncut, so they used to hang over, and they used to dip over the side of the pulp, so they had a certain look about them, but when you cut them, they just looked horrible. That's a weird one. And another around about the mid 30s. Yeah, I just picked that one up. It was the last one I needed for the first 28. I think I still need 29 and 30, and then 36, and I think I've got most of them then up to the mid 40s. So it's important to get the early ones first. I mean, obviously they're the oldest and the harder ones to get. There we go. Now that's a weird one, because although you have ostensibly the Shadow's hat and cape there, there's no actual sign of the man himself. So that's a bit of an anomaly, that one. But I'm sure he's there somewhere. Maybe that's him in disguise, the lady. I don't know. Nice legs if it is. And then on the other side, one of the action covers. That one I think is Graves Gladney, not your man George Rosen. Yeah, there's another nice action shot. Washington Crime, and then there's still a lot of these with just the Shadow's hand and the ring. You can always tell it's the Shadow by even if you just see the hand, because it's always got the ring, which is actually a gyro. What they call a gyrosol, and it has properties. When he was learning his mystical techniques in Tibet, I think it was, he got this ring, and it has mystical properties to cloud men's minds, apparently. So be careful, I might cloud your mind. Right, there's another classic from the mid 30s. Not so good. The Shadow's not on there at all. But as I say, that would be like mid 40s. So that's when they stopped worrying about getting the Shadow on the cover. Just getting the magazine out, I think, was the main concern. There's another with just the hands, and that's another Graves Gladney in the late 30s. Then another very action-packed cover, another one of my favourites. And another from the later 30s, in fact 1940. The other one, and again, I don't know why they kept doing these covers with just the Shadow's hand on it. On one of those you got the hand, and then you just got the Shadow. Why they didn't do the action thing on every cover, I don't know, because they're miles better. You can just about see the Shadow's nose in that one. Your Roman nose. Another one from the late 30s. They missed a beat here, because they had two stories in here which both got wonderful covers. I mean, that's a nice cover. But that one, the other one, is one of my favourite covers from the early 30s. But they couldn't get that onto the front, but there you go. You can't have them both. Joe Cardona, he's the police chief, much like the guy out of the Batman. Can't remember his name. You know what I mean. Jim. Come on, help me here, Jim. Oh, I've forgotten. Never mind. Here's another one. With just his hand. And there's a nicer one, which they should have put on the front. Jim Gordon. That's one I was trying to think of a while back there. When you get to my age, you'll have forgotten things as well. Right, there you go. Another classic. I think that's Graves Gladney rather than George Rosen, but a nice one nevertheless. And one of the shadow covers. Right, now this is a very famous shadow cover. It's a homage to the painting of the boys outside the church, which when you look at it looks like two boys, and then when you look at it another way, it's a skull. You can see it better on the back there. There's the skull. Very famous shadow cover, that one, and that one's not so good. So thank goodness they chose to go with the with the skull cover. It's another one of my favourite covers from the early 30s. Most of my favourite covers seem to have some sort of a red background. I don't know if that says something about my colour preference, but yeah, that's a nice cover. Then on the back you've got another later one from 1941, and then we are picture of Dorian Gray. I assume that is a tribute to. And you look at that and you think the shadow's not on there. Well, he is actually, because that is his Lamont Cranston persona. Or alter ego, if you wish. Right, there's another one from the mid-30s, and strange one that. Strange. You'll notice that the hat changes shape in a lot of these covers. Sometimes it looks more like a Western type of hat, and then other times it looks like I don't know, just a felt mess. But yeah, it's certainly specific to the shadow. That particular hat is another classic. As you can see, it's got a bit of, well, orange, more orange than red, but there again, another one of my favourite covers that I used to have. And there's one from the early 40s. That's just before it turned. It might be worth mentioning that during the early, well, about 43 or 44, the magazine went from this size to digest size, sort of like half of that, if you can imagine that, cut down the middle. That was the size they went with. Right, we're up to 43 now. This is where they get a bit more patchy, because a lot of the later ones I don't have, but of the ones I've shown you so far, they're mostly all there, up to number 43. The key, and it's just the shadow in silhouette again. That's number 45, and then we jump a bit. One of the action covers, and another one of the 1940s, I think, or late 1939 covers. Yeah, it's interesting. Even more interesting is the one on the back, because that's one of the very early covers. That's about the shadow last. I think that's maybe the first. It's maybe the very first. After the one that they produced for the copyright reasons, I think that might have been the very first of the full run of Shadow. But anyway, those cover, I'm not sure whether these were stock covers that they just added a shadow to, the earlier ones, but there's none of these earlier covers on the front, by the way. There's another classic action cover. This particular one's got 3 stories for some reason, I don't know why. This is where the Shadow magazine got a bit strange, because they changed it to Shadow Mystery, The shadow wasn't on the cover, and they went for all these surrealistic covers. So these ones you can buy quite cheaply, obviously, because nobody really, apart from the die-hard collectors, nobody really wants these. I had a couple of them and I didn't like them very much. Another hand, really. Shame about this one because I prefer the other one as the front cover, but I don't publish them, so it's not up to me. Here again, you just have the. I've been better off with that one, but here again. Right, we move into the mid-50s now. One of the action covers, Lady in Peril, and I think that was from a Shadow Annual. Let's have a look. Or maybe not. I think they probably reprinted that on a Shadow Annual a bit later, but those came very late in the. It's another, as you say, you can see the red in the background there. That's another one I particularly like. Shadow Pondering Something. And then that's pretty bog standard Shadow. That one, not so interesting. That was one of the later stories, 1948, when say George Rosen came back to do some covers. Might be worth mentioning at this point, just to take a little break from showing you these, that these were written by an author called Walter B. Gibson, I think it was. And he wrote these under the pen name of Maxwell Grant. Now, the standard of writing, compared with what you would read these days, is fairly sort of simplistic, if you like. But the Pulps do have that place in history because, as I say, at the time that's all there were. And these guys, they got about a cent a word for writing these pulps, which is doesn't amount to a lot really when you consider the time that you would have to put into it. But obviously, to earn enough money to live on, they had to knock these out pretty quick. So you had guys. Walter Gibson, who wrote these, was probably writing The Shadow, and then had some other jobs in between, The Shadow being sort of twice a month. He probably knocked these out in a couple of days, and then the other 10 or 11 days that he had, he would be writing for somebody else. And these authors, they had to do that to earn, enough to put some bread on the table for their families. As I say, it was in the early 30s, it was a tough time in America, so they were lucky to have a job, and B, they really had to work hard to. So you might look at it now and think, oh, this writing is a bit simplistic and not very literate, but at the time, people lapped it up. And the guys who did the covers as well, they didn't get paid a great rate, and some of these covers are absolutely beautiful. I'd love to have a few of the original paintings. Let's put it that way. Anyway, back to the few that I have left now. A strange cover, and one from I think that was early 40s. That one you can normally tell the ones from the late 30s, early 40s, because they're they're not George Rosen. Here's another one with 3 stories in. Now you can see what I mean about the covers not having the shadow on and being very surrealistic. And I think I prefer that one of the two, but never mind. Now, that's one of my very favourite covers. I actually made an error when I ordered a couple from America recently, and I ordered issue 45, which I already had. I realised after I'd ordered it, so I quickly changed it and emailed the American company and said, look, I made a mistake. Can you send me issue 65? When I looked at issue 65, I knew I didn't have issue 65. When I actually looked at it online, I found it was actually one of my favourite covers, so that was very, very fortuitous. I like that one for some reason, which is more than I can say for the other one. Scotland Yard. This is the Shadow travelling to Europe, as is that one where he travels to Paris. You can see in the background there. You can't actually see the ring on that, but that will be the Shadow's hand here. Okay, now this is a major annoyance to me, this issue, because I don't particularly like that cover. But on the back it's got one of my favourite covers, which is that one. That one is a story of Shiwan Khan, who was the villain in the film I mentioned earlier. And that is a lovely cover. I'll move it a bit further so you can see it a bit better. I mean, I love that. Even though the shadow's not in it, that is one of my favourite covers, and I would love to have seen that in its full glory on the front, but unfortunately, it's not. That's an unusual one, in as much as you more or less have the shadow as Lamont Cranston, so presumably that guy is lighting his fag. If he puts 2 and 2 together, he might know Lamont Cranston is the shadow, but I don't know, I haven't read that particular story, so I don't know what goes down. That's a weird cover on the back there. Black Dragon. Right, we're coming to the last of these now. That's one of the later issues from 1941, and then probably the most horrible shadow cover I've ever seen is that one. I mean, that is foul. I don't know who did it, but they weren't shooting. And maybe the shadow could do it for us. There's the shadow in peril again. Just about to get himself out of it, apparently, and there's another one from the late 30s or early 40s as it happens. Shadow's in trouble there, to be sure. And this is another triple issue. One of those horrible covers on. We're up in the 80s now, so I'm missing quite a few round about here. You have to look a bit close to see the shadow on that one, but he's there up the top. And there's the old hands again. That's a nice cover. That was the last but one Shadow Adventure, Black circle. And in contrast, that was one of the very first. Red Menace. There again, you know, just the shadow in silhouette, so whether that was another stock cover that I just added the shadow to, who knows. Okay, strange one, but nice. And there he is down there. Case of where's Wally on some of these covers, you know, spotting where the shadow is. That's an interesting one. Mardi Gras mystery and not so good. Okay, we come to the last few now. It's a weird one. That's the 100th issue. I thought I'd get that one while the going was good. And that's one of these horrible covers, and that one's not much better, to be honest. And then we move into the late hundreds now. As I say, there's 120-ish of these being reprinted, so I'm well over halfway. And so I have a lot of the earlier ones, so that's a good thing. It might be worth mentioning at this point that the Shadow, much like Batman, had people who helped him. You know, as Batman had his Alfred and other people, Jim Gordon and whatever. The Shadow had a series of agents who gathered information for him. They never actually saw him much. They just worked for him, and he sort of like popped up like a phantom and got the information and was away again. So although, you know, I like these sort of lone Avenger characters, like the Clint Eastwood character in the Dollars films, love him. He's sort of like the laconic lone gunman, if you like, and then the Shadow's the same, but he does differ in as much as he does have this circle of agents who help him out. It's a weird one. Okay, let's move these out of the way. There we go. Block up the camera. Right, we're down to issue 113. These are some of the older stories now. I mean, there's no shadow on that one. I don't know why. And these are the two Shadow annuals. That is annual 1. And that is annual number 2 with 3 stories. It's a nice cover. And that contains one of the very earliest stories. That's when they decided to stick the Shadow himself on the cover. And as far as pulp facsimiles go of the Shadow, that's all I have. The Shadow has quite an interesting history, apart from what I told you about his genesis as a voice on the radio, because he's one of these characters that they never really managed to keep down. I'll just show you very briefly here. I have all the paperbacks. Sorry. This was a one-off. A firm called Dover Publications put this one out. There again, it's a double issue. Slightly smaller than the ones I've been showing you from Sanctum Books and Nostalgia Ventures. There again, you've only got the one cover. The other covers are buried inside there somewhere. But yeah, that was just a one-off. I don't know why, whether it just didn't sell too well or what. But yeah, that was that. And then Let's have a look. What's just having a look for the. I can't remember the year. Yeah, no, it's 1963. Early 1960s. They decided they would resurrect the good old Shadow, who had been out of circulation for 20 odd year. 13 year, 14. By the time this came out, they did some original stories. This is actually not Maxwell Grant; it's by Walter Gibson. So he's used his proper name on there, and these were a series of original stories that were done by Belmont Books in America. I think we've got reprints of them over here, but I don't have any of them. I think I have the complete set here. Not particularly inspiring covers. That's although that's a new story. That's just a reprint of one of the Pulp covers by George Rosen. As is that, I believe. Shadow Go Mad, weird title. Gone back to Maxwell Grant now. You'll see. So why that particular one was by Walter B. Gibson, I do not know. There we go. The Night of Maxwell Grant and Shadow Destination Moon. Don't know. And this was actually done a bit later by Tempo Books, I think it was. Yeah, Tempo. This was a reprint of an actual pulp story called The Grove of Doom, which I showed you in the facsimiles there. And then that was the end of that little session with the Shadow, and then Bantam Books decided they would resurrect him again. These came about in late 1960s, 1969, and they started to reprint the earlier stories. I think I did 4 of these. These are all the 1931 stories, which were the very earliest. Strange covers, I have to say. No, I'm wrong, there's actually 5 of them. Even more. 7 apparently. Yeah. I mean, that actually looks more like pulp character called the Spider that does the Shadow, so I think they've probably got their heroes mixed up there, as does that. And then, not finished with resurrecting the pulp reprints, Pyramid Books of America decided to bring back the original pulp stories. I'm just trying to look for a date on these. Look, must be one somewhere. Oh yeah, this is 1974. So, now the interesting thing about these is, any of you who know about comics or know the name Jim Steranko, is a big Shadow fan, and Jim Steranko did the covers for all these. I think there was 24 of them, all reprinting pulp stories. That's unmistakably Steranko. Steranko. That's a lovely cover on that one. He's one of my comic book heroes, to be sure. I'll put him a bit closer so you can see him better. That's not the greatest. That one's not so great either. That one's nice. This is that one. That's a classic, to be sure. And that's pulled straight from the Pulp covers, that one. Very recognisable. Oriental Fiends, big feature of a dent in that one at some stage. Right, and then we have Ladies in Peril. And more Ladies in Peril. And a nice Zeppelin there. Quite fond of Zeppelins. And a classic. 19 and number 20. And Ladies in Peril. And more Ladies in Peril. Obviously Steranko likes his... Oh, there we go, more Ladies in Peril. And you see a theme building up here. Right, yeah, that was number 23. I thought there was 24, but there's only 23. And then there were 4 reprints. That is a second printing of number 1 and 9 and 11. And last but not least, nice action cover of number 12. So that's where I am with the Shadow. I've got a few books about the Shadow. I'll just briefly mention this one. I won't show you them all, so we haven't got time. But I'll briefly mention that one. That's a particularly nice. I think that's from the 1970s, that one. And it's got a load of history in there and a lot of covers. Run down on all of the instances where the Shadow's been involved in media. He did appear in comics in the 1940s. He had his own radio show. Orson Welles famously voiced him, played him in quite a few of the radio shows, and there were a few films. I wouldn't say they were blockbuster movies. B movies would probably cover it, or C movies maybe. But yeah, that's the Shadow. So I hope you found that educational. I enjoyed it because the Shadow is one of my favourite characters of all time. And I thank you for watching, and I'll try and get another video out a bit quicker next time. Goodbye everybody, thank you.